Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Full Potential Show. I'm James Rick, and this is your number one non-boring source for personal development. And today on the line, we have Simon Casey, consultant, speaker, relationship expert, and author of Secrets to Emotional Wealth. Follow your yellow brick road. We're so happy to have him on today. He's been on the CBS Morning Show, PBS Pat Router, Today Morning Show, all different kinds of shows. But today, the most important one, the Full Potential Show. Simon, glad to have you here, buddy.
Good morning. Good morning, James. Glad to be on your show.
Well, let's dive in. I know we've had some fun technical issues today, and we're going to really make this one work. Tell me, what was the inspiration behind your book, Emotional Wealth? And let's talk about what some of the basic principles are.
The inspiration really started way back when I started my internship. And one day, a psychiatrist friend of mine and I walked into a psych facility, and we were going to see this 16-year-old girl. And we walked into a room, and she was in her bed, and she had both of her arms bandaged. Obviously, she tried to commit suicide. And the time that we were there, she really did not say much, but I want this pain to end. I don't want to live like this anymore. It's very difficult to comprehend when somebody is talking about this kind of pain if you've never experienced it. So when I walked away, I asked myself why people suffer. That was the question. Why people suffer? And as years went by, and I realized even the most educated or even the most intelligent people suffered. So intelligence really did not play much of a factor.
Well, and sometimes even more so, because their inner world is so complex that it can become its own hell. It's just,
enemy.
Yeah.
Exactly. And intelligence may sometimes work against a person. Of course it does, because it becomes your form of defense, because you have to justify everything. So as I went on, I realized what was lacking was emotional intelligence, not intellectual intelligence. So then I looked at it even more. Then it became very simple and understandable. Lack of emotions causes all kinds of complex human suffering. That was the basis of how my book really started.
So you had this experience, this deep emotional experience. This girl, she wants to kill herself. She's suffering. And you're like, how can she suffer so much, and why is it necessary? And as you began to explore this idea of emotional wealth began to take shape, right?
It's how it all started.
Okay.
And of course, we all want to fix. We want to make people feel good, but it just don't have the power to do it. But of course, all healing, self-healing, is to do with you. You have to be the guru. You have to be the person who's fixing yourself. But I realized most people don't have the skills to do it, especially emotional skills. And that's where it all begins or ends. You know, we put a lot of emphasis on understanding outside world, the physical things, the wealth and the success. We acquire all kinds of physical things to be wealthy and healthy, but we really don't implement anything internally to become emotionally wealthy, have to be enriched from within. So we do all these things on the outside, but nothing much on the inside.
All right, so Simon, what I hear you saying is there's so much focus on the outer world because it's so tangible, it's so visible, but there's a lot of neglect that's happening in the inner world, right?
That's correct.
And you know what's interesting about that, and I think intuitively I felt this from an early age as I got into business more as a teenager and in my later teens. When I'd read a business book, I'd always make sure I balanced that with a spiritual book, because I felt like I'd lean too far into the physical, into the outer world, if I didn't balance that with exploring the inner world in a balanced way. And you know what? Up until even a few months ago, I started to read a lot more business books, and I got away from my core. And it's something that you feel like you really do feel like you need to go back and nurture your soul if you move too far from that. And I think that's what you mean when you say emotional wealth too, right? It's moving back to your core and being in touch with your center.
That's correct. You are who you are within. I mean, if you look at yourself, we're made out of 3 different bodies. There's a physical body, there's an emotional body, and there's a spiritual body. They all function together, not one or the other. So you take the core part of you out, then you become a hollow individual. So what are you really? So you're no longer a human being, but you're a human doing, right?
Yes. And so this idea of emotional wealth, then, so you've mapped out ways that people can build wealth internally, which is
Yes.
such a great metaphor, I think, because, yeah, it's like, at first you hear it, you're like, wealth, okay, wealth building, I'm going to do it externally, and there's so many different principles for that. But you're talking about the principles of wealth building to build a rich inner world.
Exactly. Well, you know, a lot of wealthy people out there, and God knows I've treated some of them. These people are successful, wealthy, and they're depressed and suicidal. And you kind of go, how could that happen? They
Did you
seem
trade
like
them some of their wealth for your emotional wealth?
Yes.
Okay.
You
It's a
see
good
it.
trade-off.
Yes.
Okay.
But you see it, how they come in, and, you know, it kind of difficult to conceptualize because they seem to have everything and yet they have nothing. And they're suffering as much as other people. And that's what it is. It's all about balance, James. It's all about understanding how to build something from within and build on a core foundation that everything will last and serve the person.
And this is such an important concept because you can have all the physical external wealth you want, but in the end, this is where we get into, you know, money doesn't make you happy. It makes your physical journey easier, but
Yes.
that doesn't necessarily equate to happiness. Start with that emotional core, that spiritual core, and then make your physical journey easier. There's nothing wrong with that, having the wealth outside and inside. But if I were to make a choice, if I had to choose this or that, I would choose the internal wealth first because that's where all my happiness is going to come from. And then you're at you have a strong foundation to do some of the external wealth building things that you need to do long term.
Well, when you do external and you have the money to define you, when you build internal, you define the kind of money that you make and how it serves you. Two different concepts.
And you know, it's also an interesting place that you come from when you're building this wealth because internally, when you're building that internal wealth, it's not for ego. You're doing it more for soul or spiritual. Whereas external wealth building, a lot of it, once you get past survival, a lot of it has to do with ego, projection, magnification, glorification. So when you start within, usually you're going to use your wealth more wisely than if you start outside first.
You know, James, most people don't understand ego, but in a simplistic term, all ego is who you think you are. Okay? And ego, as far as I'm concerned, is a big, dark, black hole. It's an insatiable hole. You just put anything and everything goes right through and wants more. It's never good enough, and it's never enough. And that's why people who are ego-based cannot seem to make enough, cannot seem to work enough, cannot seem to eat enough, cannot seem to drink enough. It all is in the same fashion.
In Buddhism, they call it the hungry ghost.
That's right.
It's never fed. All right, so we understand that building wealth outside before you build your treasure inside is kind of a fruitless activity. You're never going to be satisfied. You're never going to be happy. What are some of the keys for building this wealth internally that you've discovered?
First thing I looked at, what is the most important element? Of course, the most important element are the emotions. And I was so amazed that when I was doing therapy and I was asking the question, what are you feeling? Over 95% of the people did not know what they felt.
They just couldn't put a label on it? They knew they were feeling something, but they couldn't describe it, or they just were dead to what they were feeling?
They couldn't feel. They will tell me what they think they should be feeling. For instance, if I ask you, how are you feeling, James? You would say, fine. Fine is what you think you are. But if you really look deep within, you may be feeling sad. They're not the same thing.
It's the difference between living inside your head and being aware of what's going on inside your heart and your emotions. Yeah.
You see the difference between the heart and the brain. So in a society we live in, oftentimes we were forced to tell people what we think we should tell them, and we live in a constant state of discomfort in our body because we can't tell them what we truly feel. So there's a level of uneasiness with people. They can never seem to express what they really feel. There are reasons for that, and one of them is, you know, if I tell you what I feel, you may not like me, or that I might be rejected for the way I feel. So why bother?
And sometimes it just feels more dangerous. I know that I was a head dweller for a while, Simon, and what I realized is I felt more in control in my head and doing things very logically and processing everything through my head than returning to my heart, where I had felt a great deal of pain once and loss of control totally. So there is also a payoff in the sense of feeling greater control, because the emotions are much harder to control, much harder to label, much harder to contain, whereas logic, you can label it, you can structure it, you can map it out, you can write it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about, what most people try to do. How do I control my emotions? And yet, you cannot control the way you feel.
Yeah, you feel first and then you think about how you feel.
Yes.
But
So
you can also think your way into feeling, but yet the feeling still is a living process, whereas the thinking is more of a constraining, controlling, packaging, processing kind of process.
yes, there's nothing wrong with the way you feel. It's what you do with those feelings where the problem really comes.
How
So
you choose to react to the feeling.
exactly. So people got it backwards. Instead of controlling your feelings, you control, because you cannot control the way you feel, but you can control the way you respond to your feelings. And that's what people miss. It's a huge concept.
So you can, and this is the pause between the stimulus and response idea, because
Yeah.
the emotion is the stimulus. The emotion is, woof, you feel a certain way. Let's say you feel angry. Now,
Yes.
it happens so fast that people are like, I'm gonna react, I'm gonna be angry, I'm gonna throw things, I'm gonna punch. But what you're saying is the real power is feeling the anger, feeling that emotion, and then going, wait a minute, before I do anything, I'm going to at least just sit with this. I'm going to at least be curious about why I'm feeling this way and
Exactly.
not feel compelled to act based on the
Exactly.
emotion.
You're right on, because once you kind of capture the feeling and you know where it's coming from and you know what you need to do, you are able to be in charge of your own world. But most people are so reactive to what they feel. So they do a lot of self-destructive things, such as punching holes in the walls, drinking alcohol, using drugs, just to escape it. But it's a never-ending drama. So the idea is know what you're feeling, act, not react, and process it out of your system.
And act consciously. Now, do you have some ideas for how to process this in healthy ways? Because, anybody who's ever experienced these emotional states that are intense, I used to have a temper where if, I felt a certain way, when I would feel a certain way, it was mostly I would say things and then I'd later regret it. I would just feel angry. And then later, it took time, because it doesn't happen right away. It took time to notice it, catch myself, and then pretty soon I was catching it before I said it, and then I'd catch it when I felt it. So do you have suggestions on how to accelerate the process of emotional discovery, feeling the emotion, and then not immediately acting on it, maybe channeling it in healthier ways?
Before I answer that question, let me tell you what you just described. Many people walk around the world with baggage. In fact, they have too much baggage. All baggage is repressed emotions. In other words, if you hold on to your feelings, they're going to turn into negative energy. So the bigger baggage you have, the more reactive you become.
Yes.
The problem is when somebody experiences something here and now, in this moment, they are not only reacting to that event, but they're reacting to thousands of events that they've piled up.
Yes.
So they can't really figure out what's what anymore.
It's like an emotional landfill, or land, like a land, like where there were mines. There's all these minefield. That's what I was looking
They're
for.
all going up, yes.
So there's an emotional minefield of all these charged emotions from past events, and they didn't go in and diffuse the mines. They just kind of buried them.
Exactly.
And now, as new events trigger these mines, they explode, and you're like, "Boy, that seemed like an overreaction," but they only overreacted because it was something deeper that they hadn't dealt with.
Yeah, it's like a chain reaction. And when you have, let's say, anger, and that anger recalls all the angers for the past, and then they all come up, and the person becomes overwhelmed, they become overreactive, and they end up doing things that they regret, and they go, what have I done?
Yeah.
And so the idea is life is happening in this moment. So you cannot go back and change your past. But if you know what's happening to you in this moment, and do you know the feeling, and if you do, how do you manage it in the present, gives you a sense of ability to work through these past emotions at the same time. So you don't find yourself reacting, but mostly acting on what's happening to you.
And it sounds like you not only should be aware of what's happening to you now and dealing with that now, but before anything should come up that might trigger one of these minds, it's probably a good idea to go into that minefield and start diffusing some of those old, charged, repressed emotions.
Yeah, I mean, life is happening right now because a lot of the time people think, maybe I need to go back and dig out all these things. Well, you know what? That's not going to work that well because...
Okay, so you say leave the minds, just keep moving.
I mean, you can't take a look at it. It's like going back to your childhood. How much of your childhood you can't really recall the event exactly the way it was and what actually took place? Because we have strong defenses. One of them is denial. So when you go back, you're really running into your own defenses and how distorted or modified they are. So it may not be necessarily true. So you take a look at the event and the feeling in the present and deal with it as it happens. As you master your feelings in the present, past works itself out in the present.
Interesting. Okay, in the present, and that's the only place you can ever really work anything out from the past is in the present.
Exactly. Life is happening right now, not tomorrow.
And not yesterday.
Exactly.
All right, so let's run through a scenario so that we can get the real world step-by-step process. So, okay, something happens, because something always happens, right? So something happens, it causes us to feel a certain way. We could feel sad, angry, mad, whatever the intense emotion is. So now we're hit with it. Now, normally we run through a pattern when that emotion hits, right? If we feel vulnerable, we're going to react a certain way. If we feel like somebody wronged us, we're going to try to right the situation. But in this case, we're going to experience the emotion. What questions do you ask yourself, Simon, when you're experiencing that emotion? That somebody can just kind of go through step by step. Walk me through this process.
Okay. The first thing I do is when I experience a feeling, I ask myself what feeling or feelings I'm experiencing right now.
Okay, so try to label it and maybe even write it out.
I go sad, hurt, and angry.
Okay,
These are
so maybe
feelings.
one-worders.
Okay?
Yeah.
So exactly, they're one word. And then I try to identify what's causing them or who's causing them.
Okay.
That's step 2.
Okay.
And then step 3 is what is it that I need to do to confront the feeling effectively?
Effectively.
Go to the person.
Key word there. Okay.
Yeah, most people retaliate, act out, blame. Has nothing to do with it.
Okay.
I want to give you an example. Let's say you did something that you really didn't mean to do, but you did it anyway, and I felt really sad about it. And if I come and tell you, hey, James, I really feel sad, do you feel offended?
No.
Here's what people do. James, you made me so sad. You're such a jerk. You're such this and such that. And they retaliate, act out. And then what happens? It becomes a drama.
And notice there's just the subtle shift of I'm sharing with you my internal feelings, which is totally non-confrontational versus when you did this, I felt a certain way. Although it may seem like the same conversation, you've now attacked. When you did this, it should be I feel a certain way when this event happened. You make it more neutral rather than you, or especially when you put meaning on what somebody did. You didn't care how I was feeling. Right? I mean, then now they're in defense. Now you're going to have all this turmoil. But it's, I was feeling a certain way, and I felt that you didn't care about my feelings. And they go, oh, no. That had nothing to do with it. That's the concept, right?
That's true. Because I am responsible for my feelings. I can never make you responsible for my feelings.
Think about it. Make you responsible. And also, I can't interpret what your intention was unless I tell you how I felt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it is not that you're feeling sad. It is what you do with that sadness tortures you. Okay? Because emotions are negative nor positive. They are what they are. What makes them negative or positive is what you do with them. So if I hold on to the sadness, it's going to become negative. That's a trapped emotion. Okay? But if I share with you, it flows naturally. It becomes positive. And I feel relief. I feel good. In fact, there's open communication, honesty, understanding, clarity, etc., etc.
All right, and this is pretty basic stuff. I mean, the main reason, and this goes back to the ego concept, the main reason why people don't have open communication, in my perspective, and I want to get your thought on this, is because they're either A, afraid that they're going to offend or hurt somebody, or B, they're afraid that they're going to be vulnerable or rejected in releasing this idea and it not being received well. And so really you have the ego on their side, which can be on a defense and go back at them, and you have the ego on their side, which is trying to protect itself. And if you rise above that and you openly communicate, you basically obliterate all of the sort of the ego dramas that really dictate the relations of our human interactions on a global scale. I mean, almost, I would say 90% or more of all human interactions are ego-based. And to really have the open communication, I have to communicate to you, Simon, on a deeper level, and I have to want to care and work things out and know that you may offend my ego or whatever, and we can talk about it openly in third person and say, my ego felt offended, but I really want to work this out with you. Sure. And it's a deep concept, but yes, this is what you're talking about, right? When you elevate your conversation to open communication.
That's correct. There is one major factor that stops people from doing it, and that's to do with our belief system. And our belief systems are basically pretty much stored in our subconscious. Subconscious mind is like your hard drive of a computer. You got all these programs. So as a child, if you learn growing up that your feelings are not okay, or you're not entitled to feel the way you need to feel or express them, so you're programmed.
Beliefs put constraints on the emotion. It's kind of like damming them up. Belief, belief. And what you're saying is we can turn those beliefs around and let that emotional flow go. Exactly,
because it gets in the way. I mean, if I feel that I'm not worthy of my feelings, I'm not going to come and tell you that I feel this way or that way. So I'm going to lie to you. So you look at it, most relationships, believe it or not, based upon dishonesty and fakeness of what people do. And that's why I hear most of the time people say something like, I don't know what happened. After 6 months of marriage, my partner has changed. And I go, no, I don't think your partner has changed. I think the facade or the mask just came down and you're not seeing your partner for who he or she really is. They go,
that's a great point, Simon. Because really, if you've been in a relationship where, and some people haven't experienced it so they can't contrast it, but I've been in relationships where there's a facade, where you're not really openly communicating 100%. And when you do, when you cross that line and you're both vulnerable and you're both willing to communicate openly, you feel alive. You feel the connection. And even in that same relationship, if for some reason or another the old facade comes back, even for a moment, even for an hour, you feel the disconnect. And that's where I think people really start to feel like the relationship isn't really that exciting anymore. It's not because their partners changed, like you said, it's because a wall came down somewhere. It's protecting something, and you got to open that up again.
It is not possible to have intimate relationship unless you learn to be vulnerable emotionally.
And that requires a high level of trust.
Sure.
And that's where you've got to be protective. You got to be protective until you're sure you can trust that person.
Well, you want to find somebody who you can share with. So you establish safety based upon honesty and understanding. Of course, you don't want to go into a relationship where you want to be judged by somebody and somebody takes your inventory, humiliates you, puts you down. No, nobody wants to be in a relationship like that. Unfortunately, there are some people do.
All right, Simon, you've got your book, Emotional Mastery. Where can they pick up the book? And I want to get any final thoughts before we wrap up. I've had a very enlightening conversation with you. I hope everybody who's been watching and listening has been enjoying it as well. Where can they pick up a copy of the book, Secrets to Emotional Wealth?
They can actually go onto my website, www.emotionalmasteryinternational.com. They can go online, exlibris.com. It will be out on Amazon pretty soon. It will be coming out.
And now I know you've got a very generous offer for everybody who's watching right now, this is the benefits of listening to the Full Potential Show. Anybody who's watching or listening right now will get a PDF version of the book immediately upon request. Where do they contact you for this, Simon?
They can email me on my website, and I can get them daily, and I'll be more than happy to forward a copy to them immediately, so they don't have to wait anymore.
If they go to emotionalmasteryinternational.com, they can just email you directly through your website, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This book is Secrets to Emotional Wealth. Follow your yellow brick road. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today, Simon. I appreciate all your insights. Thanks, buddy.
My pleasure. Thank you, James.
All right, everybody who's watching and listening right now, be sure and check out the book, Secrets to Emotional Wealth. You can go to emotionalmasteryinternational.com, and be sure and like and subscribe the Full Potential Show so you can get more great insights from folks like Simon and freebies that you'll only find right here on the Full Potential Show. Thanks again, Simon. Have a great afternoon.
Pleasure. You too, James.
Bye-bye. Well, that concludes this week's episode of the Full Potential Show, your #1 non-boring source for personal development. I'm James Rick, and if you want to get more positive programming for your brain absolutely free on a weekly basis, just visit fullpotential.com.
If you like the Full Potential Show, you're going to love the Full Potential Club. What would you like most as a Full Potential Club member? Be 2 to 3 times more productive? Do what you're passionate about? Have more energy? Reduce your work hours? Travel the world? Enjoy an amazing lifestyle on a frugal budget? What if you could do them all? James Rick has been there and done it in ways that few people have. For anyone serious about taking their life or business to the next level, you know you've got to do more than just watch. You've got to do. Join James Rick and other like-minded people for an incredible $10 a month at fullpotential.com/club. Be educated. Be empowered. Be the best version of you. fullpotential.com/club. Try it free for 30 days.